Chapter 31 Knowledge and Advancement. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Once she was finished reading the last message that Mason had left to her, tears began to run down Evelyn's eyes and onto his diary. She now had nothing left of her brother and had read his final words to her. Still, this only strengthened her resolve to move forward and try and find a way to reunite with him, even if he had died again. Both of them had already died once and ended up on this strange new world full of magic. So, it should be possible for her to meet with him again. Now, what order does he want me to read the other books in? Turning the last page of the diary, she found the order that her brother was encouraging her to read the books in. Well, the first couple are certainly the ones I am most interested in. Putting down Mason's diary, Evelyn flew over to the bookshelf and took out the one she was most wanted to read. She had already read the first couple of pages as practice and to figure out exactly what was in it, but now was the time for her to really get into it. It is time. I will finally understand what this world's magic is about. Opening up the book that was titled Beginner's Manual to Magic, Evelyn excitedly started reading. There was much she did not know about this world, and the most important was definitely the magic within it. She so far had gained a few powers, but she was still unclear of how they worked, or what exactly this magical energy within her was. Okay, yeah, I get it. Magic is not something to be played around with, and it requires dedication and responsibility. Just get to good stuff. Flipping through the first pages, she skipped past the long introduction she had already read most of and went straight for the first section on magic. Once there, she began reading intently, the long guide right next to her to help with any words she did not know, or when she needed help with the actual meaning of words that could be different in certain contexts. Quickly she read through the first section and learned a decent amount about how magic worked in this world. First, that there was magical energy in the air and that with certain techniques it could be absorbed within the body to create something called a magic core, and to enhance a person's body to make it far stronger. This was the very basics of magic and was the start to learning to wield the fundamental forces of the world. Still, as Evelyn read this, she now understood better what one of the other books was and went over to grab it, her excitement rising. Though when she said book, it was actually just more of stack of papers that had been put together in a binding. Opening it up, she looked them over and realized that these were definitely the techniques the book had been talking about, though they were sectioned off into ways she did not quite understand. I think that this word means foundation, which is what was mentioned in the book. But the next one definitely says water. Oh, whatever, I will just try this one first. Taking out the one that was titled Foundation, Evelyn went to work on trying it out. She was completely consumed by the thought of trying to make a mana core and begin the path of magic in this world, that she had not stopped to read more and had neglected some obvious questions. Reading over the technique, she found that it required a certain oil to be applied to the body in the form of specific symbols in order to work. Damn, now I need this Ven, WR, oh whatever oil. I do not need to know its actual name for it to work. Flying over to the cabinet where her brother said he had left the catalog of items, she opened the drawer and found exactly what she was looking for. She highly doubted her brother would leave her a technique she could not use and began going through the catalog to find the oil she needed. Bingo! Looking through it, she found the oil pretty quickly as the 20th item on the list. And now knew where it was stored. An item used to stimulate the absorption of magical energy into the body. Very effective for use in forming a mana core and used in many high-grade techniques. Located on the right side of the bottom shelf, third from the left of the entrance. With this knowledge, Evelyn hastily flew over towards this shelf and found the oil stored within a sealed jar that had runes carved into it. Grabbing the jar, she hastily flew over to the center of the room and got ready to apply the symbols onto her body in the correct locations. Well, I do not have human anatomy, but I can just put the symbols on the closest equivalent. Once she had memorized the symbols and their approximate placements on her body, she popped the top off and began applying the oil. Of course, this was far harder than she originally thought it would be. As her feet could not reach the majority of her body, and the tip of her wing did not make the best apparatus to apply the oil. Eventually, though, with use of her ability to lower gravity, she was able to keep the oil from running off of her as quickly, and successfully applied all of the symbols to her body. Now I just need to open myself up to the energy in the air and begin absorbing it. Focusing on her surroundings, Evelyn had already gotten used to the feeling of magical energy in the air, but now on the areas where she had applied the oil she felt even more sensitive to its presence. Honing in on this sense, she tried drawing the magical energy in through the symbols, and while it did seem to have some effect, it felt obstructed, like there was a massive object blocking the flow. As this happened, she tried to force the magical energy into her body, but to little success. She did not know what the problem was, but she figured that maybe it was due to her different anatomy as an owl. However, right before she was about to give up for now, the ethersphere began humming, and the gravity around her became denser as the magical energy seemed to be drawn in. Within just a few moments, all of the ambient magical energy in the room was drawn to her and began flowing in through the symbols drawn on her body. It quickly became uncomfortable as so much energy converged within her, but she stuck it out and focused on the magical energy. The next part of the technique detailed that once she had collected enough energy, she needed to will it towards her center and form the core. Luckily, she already had practice moving the magical energy inside her body, and soon the massive amount she had collected from the foundation technique and the ethersphere's assistance began to coalesce. Hours went by like this as Evelyn absorbed more magical energy and sent it towards the forming magic core in her body, until she suddenly felt it become solid object. It felt like a small pebble within her, but she could tell that it was filled with magical energy. Yet what she did not realize at the time was how miraculous what she had just accomplished was, as no beast at her level ever should have been able to form a magic core the way humanoids did. Chapter 32 Difference between Beasts and People. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Evelyn, having formed her magic core, collapsed onto the ground exhausted. It had been a harrowing experience to absorb the ambient magic energy in the air into her body and compress it until it formed a core within her. However, as soon as she collapsed, her magic core, which should not have existed within her, began to resonate with the beast core she had been born with. It was at this moment when she realized something she had missed, being caught up in the moment of trying to form a magic core. If a magic core was necessary for someone to use magic, why have I already been able to do so? Her magic and the magic her parents used was definitely different from what she had seen from the humans. Also, it seemed that every beast had a stone within their bodies that was filled with magical energy, and Evelyn, now thinking about it, realized that this was probably similar to the magic core that humans had. I do not know enough. I just jumped right into it because I was so excited, but Mason did not know that I was going to end up as a beast, so he directed me towards the way he had learned magic. Damn, I just do not know enough. Understanding that she had jumped the gun, Evelyn forced herself up and pulled out another book. This one was about beasts, and she now thought that this one honestly should have been the first one she should have read. She had just gotten so caught up with finally being able to learn magic, that she had not stopped to consider the differences between humans and beasts at the time. But now she was worried that she had done something wrong and opened up the book on beasts and began reading. Hours passed by as she did so, cramming as much knowledge as she could into her head until she literally began to wobble from fatigue. Still, while she had not learned everything, she had figured out a great deal that answered many of her questions. First off, she learned that beasts were unlike humans who were not born with the ability to use magic. Every beast was born with something called a beast core that contained magical energy and grew stronger over time. And unlike people that needed special techniques to absorb magical energy, beasts could absorb it just by breathing the air. However, this was just one way that they increased their magical energy, and apparently the most effective method for beasts was to consume the cores of other beasts or magically enriched plants. Of course, there was a lot of speculation about beasts' evolution that Evelyn really did not understand, but she did learn that they were classified into 6 ranks and broken into 4 tiers within these ranks, starting at low, then mid, high, and finally peak. The first rank was something called a wild beast, and these were, from what Evelyn could understand, pretty much just normal beasts that had no magical powers for the most part. Then the second rank was something called a fiend beast, which was where a beast started to gain control over its magical affinity, typically grew in size, and got a lot stronger physically. After that was something called an awakened beast that had gained full control over their magical affinity and were far stronger than a fiend beast. Also, at this level apparently some beasts gained an awakening of intelligence. Though the book did not detail exactly why this happened, just that certain beasts were more likely to gain this intelligence. For the next 3 tiers the book pretty much just had their classifications written in it without any real descriptions other than that they were all incredibly dangerous. The 4th rank was classified as a tyrant beast, the 5th rank a sovereign beast, and the 6th and highest was called a calamity beast. Now having a grasp of beasts, Evelyn understood that she was probably what they referred to as a fiend beast, since she figured what had happened to her after eating that silver plum was an evolution. So, I must be at the low tier of the 2nd rank, at least according to human standards. I wonder what my parents were at. And what about that serpent? Was it at the 4th rank, maybe the 5th, or was it all the way at the top? Without a proper scale to judge the power of the beasts that she had seen, she had no way to know exactly what level they had been at. Learning all of this, Evelyn now had a decent understanding of what beasts were, at least from the perspective of humans. Still there was a lot she did not know about humans and figured she would need to delve deeper into the book on magic to find out more. Unfortunately, she was exhausted to the point of nearly collapsing, and did not have the capacity to read any more for now. I will get some sleep, and first thing tomorrow I will read some more to truly figure out the difference between beasts and humans. Collapsing on the spot, Evelyn closed her eyes and slept, recharging her exhausted body. When she opened her eyes again, the first thing she did was grab the book on magic and continued where she left off. This time she did not stop until she had finished reading the entire book, which took her the entire day. Nevertheless, the effort was worth it, since now she knew that the path of magic was far different for humans than it was for beasts. Unlike beasts who were born with or may obtain an affinity for a type of magic through evolution, humans were able to choose their affinity depending on what techniques they trained in and their compatibility. So, the basic affinities are water, wind, fire, earth, and metal. While advanced ones are nature, lighting, sound, light, and darkness. Though the book says that other concepts such life and death can be used as a basis for magic and that there were numerous other affinities that could be discovered. Shaking her head, Evelyn was starting to get a headache from how confusing this all was. There were the basic and advanced elements, but then also certain concepts could be used to create magic, which is what she figured Mason had done with Fate. Still, this was only mentioned vaguely in the book, which was mostly about creating a foundation in magic by strengthening the magic core. At least she did find out that, like beasts, humans had tiers as well. Humans that had just formed their cores were at the initiate rank, then those that had strengthened their cores enough reached the acolyte rank. After that the book did not detail what classified the other ranks, but just said that their magic cores had obtained the necessary magical energy. So that is what Mason meant in his diary when he wrote he had reached the acolyte rank. Now having a bit of context for what Mason had written, Evelyn opened his diary again and looked through it, trying to find the places where Mason said he reached new ranks. There she found that he reached what was called the mage rank, which was the 3rd rank at the age of 16, he reached the 4th rank called arcanist at 40.1, and finally the 5th rank of magi at 113, just a year before he made this place for Evelyn. I guess he did not make it to the final rank, which is called archmagi. Still, if he was at the 2nd highest rank, he must have been pretty strong, but I guess as he left me in his last message that there is always someone stronger than you are. With her understanding of this world's magic now far better than it ever had been, Evelyn leaned back and began analyzing everything she had just learned so that she could try to discern her situation better. Chapter 33 Learning about the world. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Once Evelyn had finished collecting her thoughts on her current situation, she was left with plenty of unanswered questions and whole handful of theories. I am not sure why I was able to make a magic core when I am a beast. From what I found in the books, there is no mention of beasts with magic cores, but it is just beginner's book. Sadly, it is the only one I have, as apparently it been best to figure out your own path past the foundation of creating and strengthening your magic core. Sighing, Evelyn could not be sure exactly what it meant for her to be able to form a magic core. She figured that maybe it was something all beasts could do, but these books did not mention it, or perhaps it was due to her having a human soul. She also figured the other sphere had some role to play in it, but how much she did not know. Mason had left her a good amount of general knowledge, but at this point she was already far from ordinary. From the moment she had been born into this world, she was an anomaly. A person's soul from another world born into the body of an owl. Without anyone or anything else to compare her situation to, she simply did not know how outside the norm she was compared to others. I suppose I will just have to venture out into the world and figure some things out on my own. Though I do not want anything to do with any people. Trying to think about where she might get more information, Evelyn remembered that the book on beasts said that beasts that reached the awakened rank sometimes gain intelligence. Maybe I can find a friendly awakened beast that does not want to kill me and can teach me more about this world. Laughing despairingly at this thought, Evelyn pretty much already considered that every other beast wanted her dead, and humans either wanted the same or to run terrible experiments on her. Well, I will get to that point when it arrives. For now, I need some rest and have more reading to do tomorrow. Moving over to the bed, she perched herself on top of it and slept. Until she was back at her peak and ready for more reading the next day. Going back to her books, she opened up the next one, which was an atlas of the continent she was on. It had very detailed information of the surrounding areas and the names of the nations that made up this continent. Unfortunately, whether any of this information was still accurate was impossible for Evelyn to know. This atlas had already been old when Mason first obtained it, and from what it had gathered, everything here had been sitting around at least a few hundred years. That made the atlas probably at the youngest 600 years old as far as Evelyn could tell. So by now the entire continent could look different. Still, it was all she had, so she opened it up and began reading about the powers that ruled this continent. Quickly she found the Oltec Empire that Mason had been born in, and it was certainly one of the strongest powers on the continent as far as Evelyn could see. There were 4 very large nations that controlled the majority of the continent, with one being the Oltec Empire. Then there were a few dozen smaller vassal kingdoms or territories scattered around these nations. But there were, from what she found in the atlas, 9 nations that were completely independent of the continent's 4 major powers, and one of them caught her attention. It was called the Free City of Atsabla, and from the information in the atlas, apparently this nation was a strange place where beasts and people were welcome and roamed the streets as equals. Apparently a really powerful group of both people and beasts are speculated to rule this place. But this was centuries ago. For all I know, it could have been burned to the ground or taken over by one of the 4 major powers by now. Putting this place to the back of her mind, Evelyn decided that she would revisit whether it was best for her to head there at a later time. Her information was outdated, and if she went on the assumptions that it was all still correct, she was likely to get burned. Continuing to look through the atlas, she found something else that piqued her interest. Many times, she came across places that were speculated to be high in magic crystals, and she had seen this term before in Mason's diary. Pulling out his diary as well as a book on common magic items, Evelyn went searching for what these crystals were. Luckily, she did not have to search long or hard, as they were actually the first thing detailed in the book. Reading through it, she found that these crystals had dozens of uses in this world and were actually the foundation of its economy. They were the core component in any magical device and were used as ingredients in alchemy, from what she read. But that was not all. They were also used to create dense areas or magical energy that could speed up the growth of someone's magic core. Though the book did say that a special device was needed to turn these crystals that were solid forms of magical energy, back into the gaseous form that permitted the air and could be easily absorbed by people. They also came in 6 forms, with each form above the next being considered 10 times more valuable than the one below it. The weakest being green in color, followed by blue, then red, after that was purple, the second highest was silver, and the best was gold. Wait, magic crystals. I remember that was one of the first thing on the catalog of items Mason gave me. Pulling up the catalog, Evelyn found magic crystals third on the list, right under something called a storage amulet. However, unlike most of the items, these crystals were actually put within one of the storage amulets Mason had left. Flipping through the book again, Evelyn found what these storage amulets were, and they were exactly what she had been expecting. Interdimensional storage spaces. It says that they are a rare item that are expensive and difficult to make. Still, Mason left me 3, not including that one he had set up as a decoy. Flying over to the storage amulet that was supposed to have the magic crystals in it, she grabbed it off the shelf it was hanging on. Then, as the book had said, she channeled her magical energy into it, and suddenly her mind was filled with information. She was now able to see all of the items stored within this storage amulet, which was full of magic crystals. 4,630.4 green ones, 390.8 blue, just 20.6 red ones, and 3 purple. Using her magical link to the amulet, Evelyn pulled out one of the green crystals and looked at it. She wondered if, like the cores of other beasts or magically enriched plants, and if she could eat it to get stronger. Sadly, she did not have any instinctual drive to consume this crystal, and when she tired biting into it, she found it too hard to crack. Well, I suppose that it had plenty of other uses, Evelyn thought as she put it back into the amulet. She had learned a lot today about the world around her, even if the information was outdated, and her time to leave was fast approaching. Only 8 more days until I need to leave. In that time, I need to read and understand everything that Mason left me, and finally get a true grasp on what magic is and how to use it. Chapter 34 Out into the World. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Okay, I think I got everything I can. The 8 days Evelyn had left before it was time for her to leave her sanctuary had finally arrived. Naturally, she wished she could stay longer to prepare more, but Mason had warned her that something bad was likely to happen if she stuck around any longer. She had just finished storing the most valuable and useful items that it had left into her 4 storage amulets and was getting ready to leave. Unfortunately, Mason had left an excessive amount of materials, so she had to leave a few things behind. Though none of what she was not taking was super valuable. Mostly it was just extra supplies for different types of crafting professions in case she wanted to weave magical clothing, inscribe enchanted items, or other similar things. Unfortunately, Evelyn could not even effectively do most sort of crafts since as an owl she did not have hands. Still, when reading about different jobs that focused primarily on magic, she had found one that she could do. She had found that for alchemy, she did not need her hands, as she could place any ingredients into a cauldron and could stir by using her beak, of course. While Mason had supplied her with a cauldron to use and some simple ingredients, it was not like she could become an expert in a couple of days. All she had successfully made with her few attempts was a huge mess, but she felt that she was getting the hang of it slowly. The biggest problem was that it was necessary to use a magically charged fire to heat the cauldron, but her control over the heavenly flame was still pretty much nothing. At best she could keep a small flame out for a couple of minutes, and anything else would go out of control and cause a huge explosion. Nevertheless, she still believed that trying her hand at alchemy was the way to go, since it would allow her to make many useful items. She could create potions, pills, oils, and even poisons once she had developed her skills. These items could have various effects from what she read in the book Mason had left about alchemy. From healing wounds, to quickly replenishing magical energy, just to name a couple. But while she had been trying her hand a bit at alchemy, what she had really been doing most of the time was strengthen her magic core. She had found that it had compounded with and boosted her beast core, and that the stronger it got, the more powerful her magic could become. Now she was able to increase and decrease gravity to around 3.5 times less of more in a diameter of 12 feet, and her gusts of wind had become a lot stronger. Along with that, she had enhanced her already physically strong body with the magical energy from her magic core, making her a bit tougher than before. All in all, she had gotten a bit stronger and created a solid foundation for herself in these 90 days. She was around an intermediate level with the Long of this continent, and she had learned at least a bit about the world. Even if her information was outdated. Sadly, there was one very important thing she found she was incapable of. Human spells required both specific hand motions and to speak the name of the spell begin cast in order to activate. In this way they took the raw form of a person's magical energy and affinity and created more complex effects than what could be used just exerting magical energy. That was why her parents' magic was much less focused than the man who had taken them down. With his spells he was able to create specific phenomenon like manifesting two massive hands of earth or covering himself in a layer stone that gave him an impeccable defense and made his body a weapon. So, while Evelyn could create gusts of wind, shot out a small burst of fire, and lower and raise the gravity around her. The control over her powers were minimal. She had even tried casting some of the wind magic spells that Mason had left behind but found that she simply could not get them to work. This was just another difference between beasts and humans. It is time to go. With everything she could carry with her, Evelyn exited the room that had been her home for the last 90 days. Looking back as she exited the place, she felt a sense of sorrow for having to leave her temporary base. It was the first place she had felt safe for the first time since her family had been captured by the humans in the woods. This was a place that also had a connection to her brother and contained the last remnants of his existence in this world. Thank you for leaving this to me, Mason. It was more help than you will ever know. I promise to one day find you and thank you for it. After one last look she left her temporary abode and closed the hidden wall to seal the place off. Then she flapped her wings and took to the air. Beginning the journey through the long and winding tunnel that would take her back to the surface. Soon she made it to the ladder that would take her to the cellar of the largest house in the ruins above. When she had climbed up, she could see just the faintest bit of moonlight shining down from the open cellar doors. Flying out of the cellar and then the house, she once again came out into the open air. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn enjoyed the crisp, cool night air. Before turning her gaze towards the moon that was full and bright. It seemed to have an almost golden color tonight. Different from its normal very pale yellow that bordered on being white. It looks like it is a good night for me to finally begin my journey out into the world. Evelyn thought as she gazed at the moon. She then turned her body towards it and continued flying in the direction it rose into the sky. Having decided to follow where it would lead her. Chapter 35 Evelyn's siblings. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. While Evelyn was busy strengthening herself and obtaining the knowledge that her original human brother Mason had left, her new owl siblings were alive and had their own hardships to deal with. First was Evelyn's little sister, who had been left all alone in the nest with no one to ever return. She had waited for days for her parents and siblings to come back, following their mother's last command to her and staying inside the nest. Yet on the third day she became far too hungry to wait any longer, and the reality that no one was ever coming back set in for her. With no other option she left the nest in search of food. Even though at this point she had only ever practiced hunting once, and that had been under the supervision of her mother. Still her instincts were sharp, and she was able to find some prey to eat and fill her belly. The days went on like this for her for nearly 2 weeks after her family had been captured, until the day her life was uprooted. One day when she returned home after hunting, she found that a new resident had taken over her nest, and it was one of those chameleon-like beasts that had nearly killed Evelyn when she was still a child. Unfortunately for Evelyn's sister, this was a full-grown one that was a peak wild beast that she had no chance against. In fact, when she returned home, she was almost tagged by its tongue, and only managed to avoid it thanks to her heightened senses that warned her of the incoming attack. With her home now occupied by a beast she stood no chance against and with no one else to rely on. She was forced to seek shelter elsewhere, and had to leave the home she had always lived in. Still, Unlike Evelyn, who had a human mind, her sister still only had the intelligence of a normal owl. Which, while not insignificant, was not enough for her to become highly emotional about her loss. Her instincts kept her going, giving her drive to survive in this harsh and unfair world full of dangers. She simply kept on living her life in the woods, finding a place to stay where she could, until something stronger pushed her out. Truthfully, she was lucky to have survived. But she strived on and slowly began getting strong. Of course, she did not have a rapid explosion of growth like Evelyn had, thanks to being given resources every day by those at the facility. Though, after months of surviving on her own, she eventually reached the peak power she could as a wild beast. She had fought many difficult battles and barely was able to survive at times, but she managed to keep on going and gain strength for her efforts. Nevertheless, it was at this point the woods that had once seemed so full of resources, were now devoid of what she needed to get stronger. Which she had an innate desire to do, as all beasts did. This was when she began her own journey out of the Deadlands, that was nearly devoid of magical energy, in search of a place that could make her stronger. However, while Evelyn's sister's life was not a walk in the park, it was like a happy fairy tale in comparison to what happened to her brother. He had undergone the same torment that Evelyn had. Being captured by humans and locked away in a cage. Just like his sister, he had watched their parents be brutally killed, before watching Evelyn undergo the same experiment. Luckily she had managed to survive, but after that day he did not see his sister again for quite some time. His days after that were spent locked in a small cage and given just barely enough to not die. Quickly he became filthy, and the captivity began to drive him mad. He had been all but forgotten, and in some ways his treatment was worse than Evelyn's. Certainly, she may have been poked, prodded, cut open, and electrocuted, among other things. But she was given a large enough enclosure to fly around in, and more than enough to eat every day. Her brother was instead left in a small, confined space given barely enough to survive. Just in case he was needed for any future experiments. His life during this time truly was pitiful. Sadly, it only got worse from there. When the facility came under attack from an outside force, his cage was broken free from the wall, but it still stayed closed, locking him in. Yet a glimmer of hope did arrive, when he saw his sister appear out from a large hole that had been created by one of the humans' magic. He tried calling out to her, but his beak had been damaged, and he was unable to open it to let out a sound. Rattling his cage was all he could do in a bid to get her attention, but she just seemed to ignore him from his point of view. Surely, he had thought she would come to rescue him now as she had when he had been caught in that trap. But she did not. He watched as she did not even look for him, and he saw her escape on her own, leaving him to die a horrible death confined in a cage. After that, all that was left was bitterness and hopelessness. There was little doubt in his mind that he was going to die here. Not long after, though, one of the humans that had attacked the place found him and took his cage. He wondered if maybe they might set him free, a glimmer of hope coming to him. Unfortunately, when he was presented to this other human with blonde hair, they quickly threw him away like trash, leaving him in the cage to rot. This seemed like it was likely to be the end, but 2 days later, after the humans that had attacked this place had long since left, another man showed up. He came down from the sky and began looking around the place, mumbling something that Evelyn's brother did not understand. "This is just great. I finally got my hands on a treasure that fell from above and, it gets taken before my incompetent subordinates have even figured it out. I told them to be careful not to leave any trail. Damn it." Having been watching the man intently, Evelyn's brother went wide-eyed as he heard the man yell loudly, before slamming his foot into the ground. This man generated enough force with that one move to shake the ground and split it open like an earthquake had just hit the area. Fear welling up inside him, Evelyn's brother thought he was going to be swallowed up by the earth as it cracked apart. However, before he fell to his certain death, the man seemed to warp in front of him and catch the falling cage. Looks like one of the beasts they were researching on. I suppose that you will tell me what I want to know. The man then said something which obviously Evelyn's brother did not understand. Then in an instant, the door to his cage was ripped off by this man. Thinking that he was being freed, he moved to leave the cage only to be grabbed by this man's hand and forcefully yanked out. His grip was like a vice and there was no means of resistance that Evelyn's brother could offer. A moment later he felt as if his mind was being crushed as this man invaded his memories and searched through them. I see, so that is what happened. Those Empire scum attacked and destroyed my facility. But at least there is some good news. They did not get their hands on the item. Now done with Evelyn's brother who he had left in a vegetative state after ripping the memories right from his mind, the man paused before throwing him away. This owl in his grasp was the brother of the one that had his divine item in it, and it was possible that it could be of some use still. I will go check their original nest, and if it is not there, maybe this brother will be able to help me find his sister eventually. Chapter 36 36 Days of Travel, Fighting, and Progress. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Continuing to fly in the direction of where the moon rose, Evelyn made her way across the world with no real destination in mind. Currently all she really wanted to do was get away from where her original home and place of capture was. So, she flew on hoping to one day find a place she could call her new home, and advance her power and understand of this world's magic in order to maybe one day reunite with her brother. Still, she was currently in the vast open grassland she had found herself in, and she knew this was not the place for her. At the very least there were plenty of opportunities for her to test out her new power as these grasslands were full of beasts around the same level as her. Currently she was fighting a group of those possum-wolverine combo beasts that had seemed to taken over each of the trees that sparsely dotted the savanna. Flying around the tree she avoided the blasts of acid that they were all firing off, and when she saw an opening, she swooped in and sent out a gust of wind that knocked one of them out of the tree. Then while it was helpless on the ground she would drop down and dig her talons into it as she took back off into the air. That's 8. She thought as she dropped another one into the pile of bodies she was building up. Unfortunately, for the beasts she was fighting, they stood no real chance against her. As long as she played it carefully and picked them off one at a time, they had no way to actually hurt her. Their acid attacks were too slow, and if any got anywhere close to hitting her, she could just bat it away with a gust of wind. Eventually she finally killed them all, as they refused to run away from the tree that was their home even to the last one of them. Now she had a huge pile of 19 dead bodies she was not sure what to do with. Certainly, she could eat a couple of them, but the rest would just soon begin to rot, or more likely attract other beasts. I guess I will take 2 to eat and remove the beast ores from the rest of them. Then I will need to drop their bodies off a little way away so that I do not have any curious scavengers bothering me. Having figured out what she was going to do, she pulled 2 of the larger ones back up into the tree, before removing the beast cores from the rest and hauling their dead bodies around 1,000 feet away. Once that was done, she enjoyed her meal and quickly swallowed down all of their beast cores to make herself stronger. She could feel the magical energy within them permeating into her body and strengthening her own core. However, she was not finished yet as she next pulled out the oil necessary for the magical energy absorption technique that would make her magic core stronger. Maybe she was an abomination for having both a human's magical center and a beast's, but it made her quite a bit stronger than she would have been otherwise. Hours quickly went by as she absorbed the magical energy in her surroundings. She was like a massive vacuum sucking in huge amounts of energy as the ethersphere aided in her technique's effectiveness and drew in more magical energy than would seem possible. In fact, her technique's output was as high as any foundation technique the people of this world had developed, and her progress in both the strengthening of her beast and human powers were incredibly fast and of a high caliber. Eventually she exhausted herself having taken in the limits of magical energy her body could handle, and soon slipped into unconsciousness while perched in the tree she had won. When she awoke after having slept through the majority of the day, she continued her journey anew. Flying fairly low over the grasslands where she currently found herself. Yet while she tried to not gain too much altitude to avoid being easily visible, that did not mean other beasts would not see her. One such beast that did see her coming was an expert on catching flying prey. Bounding through the tall grass, it moved swiftly and stealthily towards Evelyn, who had not yet noticed its presence. Crap! Seeing the beast that was hunting her only as it pressed its body down to leap up into the air, Evelyn had no time to avoid its pounce. Bracing herself, she shot a gust of wind towards this cat-like beast that looked like a caracal. Only it was twice as large as the ones on Earth. Still, her wind gust was hardly enough to stop the momentum of this beast that had used its Earth affinity to use the ground like a spring. Yet as it closed the distance towards its prey, when it reached within 12 feet, it suddenly felt much heavier, and its momentum began to drop rapidly. Smiling, Evelyn could see that this beast that tried to take her by surprise, was astonished itself, as it entered the range of her gravity field. Spinning around unaffected by her own magic, she just managed to dodge out of the way as the caracal lost its composure and failed to land a hit on her. Then as it fell down, she decided to go after it, keeping the pressure up with her gravity. As the feline beast crashed into the ground, it used its powers to soften the earth as it had done countless times. However, even thought this lessened the blow, it still hit the ground surrounded by a field of gravity 3.5 times greater than it was used to and was unable to keep its balance. In that moment Evelyn struck down with her talons and embedded them deep in the caracal's back. Its blood began to pour out as her dagger-like talons sliced into it, and it let out a pained screech as its flesh and muscles were torn apart. Nevertheless, it was a tough beast that was a bit of a prodigy in its own right, and it turned around to counterattack with its own claws. Too slow. Pushing off and letting go, she flew up into the air and easily avoided her attacker's desperate swipes. It was still under the effects of her increased gravity and was not able to move properly, as the amount of force it used to need to complete any sort of action had gone up multiple times. Evelyn's power was simply overwhelming at this level, as most low-tier fiend beasts barely had a grasp over their magical affinity, yet she had 3 fairly well-practiced powers she could use. In addition to her greater understanding of her powers, she also simply had more of it with her magic core in addition to her beast core, making her stronger than pretty much any other beast at the same level as her. Let me see how this works. Channeling the magical energy inside her towards the heavenly flame, she caused it to increase in size and power and brought it forth outside of her body. Using all of her focus, she willed it not to explode but still found it impossible to control. At the last moment, to avoid hitting herself, she directed the explosion away from her and created a cushion of wind. Boom! Being pushed back by the explosion of her heavenly flame, Evelyn flapped around rapidly to regain her bearings and keep an eye on her opponent. Except her caution appeared to be fruitless, as the caracal that had attacked her was now just a charred mass, having taken the brunt of the crimson flames. Flying down to its smoldering remains, she tore through its body and pulled out its beast core. It is a bit bigger than the others I have had. Must have been a bit stronger. Eating this beast core, she felt its strength being broken down and added to her own. With her spoils of the battle claimed, she flew back into the sky and continued on her way. Slowly but surely gaining experience and power as she fought the other beasts within these grasslands. Chapter 37 Natural Enemy. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Around 4 months went by for Evelyn as she followed the moon and crossed over the vast grassland she had ended up in. During this time she had finally figured out the scale for the map she had, since previously she had no clue how to interpret it, what the distance between everything was. And now she knew that the world she found herself on was freaking huge. She had already flown several thousand miles pretty much in a straight line, and she had not exited this savanna yet. At the very least she had found that this savanna had plenty of resources for her to use and had leveled up her abilities some more. Her magic core had reached the beginning stages of the 2nd level, which was the acolyte rank. Now not only did it resonate even more with her beast core, which was at the mid-tier of the fiend beast rank, but her body was now much stronger than it had been before. She had found herself able to tank hits from beasts bigger than herself and exert feats of strength that would not be expected even from a 6-foot-tall owl. Along with the increase in her personal power, she had finally figured out how to make very basic alchemical concoctions. So far, she had a success rate of around 20% and had created 2 of each: a basic healing salve and a magical energy recovery potion. Of course, each of these items had to be stored in special bottles that she had a limited supply of that Mason has left for her, and really their effects were not that great. Though Mason had actually left her some higher-grade alchemical items which were far better than what she could make for now. Still, it was good for her to grow her skills so that one day she might be able to make things that she would otherwise not have access to. Unfortunately, one area she had made little progress in was control over her magical abilities. She could cause bigger phenomenon, but overall, her control over what she was creating with her magic was lackluster in her opinion. Gusts of wind, small shots of her heavenly flame, and increasing and decreasing gravity were all she could still do. Really, she had been practicing trying to at least create wind blades like her parents had, but she just could not seem to make the wind precise enough. It was always just a blunt push, and while at her best she could hit with the force of a car going around 40 miles an hour, that was it. Sadly, it seemed to her right now that she would have to figure out some way to convert the human spells that Mason had left her into something she could use, or she would forever be stuck with what she considered basic magic. Nevertheless, she kept going on, starting to get sick of the grassland she was in, as she had found that it was getting difficult to find decent prey. The beasts had either started to get too weak or too strong. Multiple times she had seen packs of beasts roaming around, and they were led by beasts she stood no chance against, with one standing out in particular. She had spotted a pride of lions, and the leading male was the size of a tank, and she felt an oppressive aura coming from it even around a mile away. Having seen this, Evelyn was certain that it was an awakened beast, as it felt stronger than every other beast she had seen, except one. While this lion was impressive, it still palled in comparison to the serpent she had seen guarding the flower that reached high into the sky, which felt like a mountain so tall she could not see the peak of it. Still, the lions she saw from a distance was strong enough for her survival instincts to tell her to stay as far away as possible. Luckily they paid her no mind, and she was able to continue on her way. Eventually she did finally make it to the edge of the grassland, which began to get lusher and greener the closer she got to the next environment. However, while she would be coming up to a large mountain range, instead what she saw was a vast thick jungle. There is definitely supposed to be a mountain range here, right? Quickly finding a safe place to land, she pulled out the atlas Mason had left her and opened it up to the page that had a detailed map of the continent's geography. Looking at it carefully, she moved up and down the grasslands, but in the direction she had been heading, there was no way she should have found a jungle. The entire western side of the grassland was supposed to be bordered by a large mountain range that cut through nearly half of the continent. She knew she had been traveling southwest the entire time, since that was the direction the moon rose in, and there is no way she should have missed such a massive natural barrier. Still, that is definitely a jungle in front of me, and it looks pretty flat from here. I know that environments can change over time, but mountain ranges do not just disappear in a few hundred or even thousand years. Heck, they should last millions of years before a drastic shift like this. Looking all around, she tried spotting any sign of the mountains that should have been at the edge of the grasslands, but there was nothing but jungle. Wait, I must be thinking about is wrong. It is probably that I am just not near the mountains yet, and this used to be part of the grasslands. Weather patterns probably just changed in this area, and it suddenly got more rainfall, causing it to become a jungle instead of a savanna. Coming up with a more logical but actually not accurate explanation for why a jungle was here, Evelyn flew back into the air and made her way over to the jungle. She figured this would be a good change of pace for her anyway, since she was getting tired of the grasslands. Now she would have her pick of trees to use as a temporary shelter without having to fight for one every time. Except as she flew into the jungle, she caught the attention of a group of beasts that had been lying in wait for her kind. Dropping out of the tree they had been hiding in, they stalked her as she flew through the jungle until they were certain she was alone and swooped in for the attack. Suddenly her instincts told her she was in danger, and she picked up the sound of wings cutting through air and coming towards her. Spinning around and changing her momentum, she moved around a nearby tree and put it between her and her attacker. Bam! Slamming into the tree was a large eagle that was easily 12 feet tall, and had Evelyn not dodged she would have been impaled by its talons and pinned to this tree. Yet her troubles were far from over, as two more eagles that were just a bit smaller than the first descended around her and had her surrounded on all sides. Chapter 38 The Eagles Attack. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Being surrounded by three very large eagles, Evelyn began to panic. She could tell from just looking around at them quickly that they were of a higher level than her, all being peak fiend beasts. Each one of them radiated an aura just as strong as her parents had, and she knew that there was no way she could win in a fight. Maybe if she was against just one of them, she would have some chance if she used her different powers well and outmaneuvered them. But against three, she doubted she could win. That meant she had really only one option, and that was evasion. I have lived through way too much to end up being killed by a few eagles, Evelyn thought as she steeled herself. Luckily these eagles were underestimating her since she was supposed to be much weaker than they were, but she had more tricks up her sleeve than they knew. Turning towards the smallest one, which was still around 11 feet tall and nearly twice as big as her, she charged at full speed towards it. Of course, these eagles thought it was just a desperate move, until the one she was aiming at suddenly began to plummet. In an instant as it was hovering there, its body suddenly felt nearly 4 times heavier and its wings were no longer able to keep it aloft with the amount of force it was exerting. Using this opening, Evelyn slipped past the eagle's encirclement and flew full speed ahead through the jungle, hoping to lose them. Naturally they all quickly gave chase, not willing to let their prey go free so easily. It was their mission to kill as many owls as they could, and they were not going to let this especially weak one go. Maneuvering through the trees, Evelyn tried to give the eagles the slip, but found they were keeping up with her even though she was increasing her speed by lowering her gravity and controlling the wind. What the hell? Suddenly feeling her feathers stand on end, she felt an incredible sense of danger and soon heard a crackling sound coming from behind her. Arching her head around to glance at what was going on, she went wide eyes as she saw sparks of electricity surrounding the lead eagle, who was the largest. Then a bolt of lightning was fired from its body towards her. Barely having any time to react, she spun her body around as the bolt passed right by her and singed a few of her feathers. Unfortunately, this maneuver slowed her down, and the other two eagles caught up to her, with one of them slamming into her. This one was crackling with fire as it hit her, trying to burn her to a crisp. Except while at first she thought she was going to get burned, she soon found that she did not feel any pain, and in fact did not feel the slightest bit of discomfort. For her it seemed as if it had just gotten a bit hotter, but no actual damage was being done thanks to her heavenly flame that prevented its host from being burned by a lesser power. With this stroke of luck and the fact that the eagle had not pierced her with its talons and instead opted to hold on to her own feet to prevent escape or any sort of counterattack, meant that Evelyn was actually pretty much unharmed. Switching up her gravity field from lower to higher, she increased the pressure around her and the eagle that was grappling with her. Immediately the two of them started falling towards the ground as Evelyn allowed herself to sink like a rock, and the eagle could not support both of their increased weight even as strong as it was. Seeing that it was going to crash, the eagle let go of Evelyn and struggled to fly up, while figuring the stupid owl would crash into the ground and they could finish it off with ease. Yet as soon as the eagle let her go, she twisted her body around and lowered her gravity, while sending a gust of wind under her to act as a cushion. Barely keeping herself from impacting the ground, she flew just inches away from hitting the surface of the jungle, much to these eagles' surprise. They had no idea how this little owl pulled off such a maneuver, or how it had survived being smothered with flames. Still, they kept after her, not pondering these questions for long, as while they were not close to stupid, they really only had the intelligence of a normal 7 to 8-year-old human child and were just doing as they had been told. Keeping after her, these three eagles continuously shot out their elemental attacks at her, trying to score a hit. But now that she was on the lookout for and was wary of their basic magic attacks, she was easily able to dodge them while flying. The only one that could cause her any trouble was the leader's lightning attacks, and as long as she stayed vigilant, she was able to predict and they were going to come, since it had to charge up for a few seconds before releasing a bolt. Nevertheless, she could not lose them, and was having to use a lot of her magical energy to keep ahead and protect herself. At the same time the three eagles were beginning to get impatient. They could not believe that a mid-tier fiend beast was giving them the runaround, when they were at the peak of the rank. Damn it! Why do they not just give up? They are coming after me way more intent than just looking for a meal. They really want me dead. Seeing that shaking these eagles was not going to happen, Evelyn began considering drastic action. For anyone else in this jungle, do not blame me if I burn it all to the ground. Funneling her magical energy to her heavenly flame, she caused its power to grow and then channeled it outside of her body behind her. Boom! Not even attempting to control the crimson flame that boasted immense power, Evelyn let it cause a massive explosion behind her and right towards her eagle pursuers. Not expecting this and being caught off guard, all of them tried to stop abruptly and move out of the way of the fiery explosion. Two of them were actually successful, but one of them got caught up in it and their body began to burn. Still, this was not enough to kill any of them, for while the heavenly flame was powerful, its strength relied on Evelyn's own, and it simply did not contain enough magical energy to kill the eagle it had hit with one glancing blow. And unfortunately, the force of the explosion had propelled Evelyn like a rocket, causing her to lose control and slam headfirst into a tree. At the very least her gravity was lowered quite a bit so the damage was less than it could have been, but it still left her stunned for a moment, and the two unhurt eagles caught up to her. This time they were not playing around and began using their elemental affinities to their fullest. As the lead eagle began crackling with greater electrical power, and the other began amassing a large amount of fire. Being caught off guard and unable to escape, all she could do was stand and fight. So, she began focusing all of her own magical power into wind. Yet before they all attacked, two large spikes made of ice went flying towards the eagles, and they had to drop their concentration to move out of the way from being impaled. Chapter 39 Ally. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Watching the eagles suddenly come under attack from another source, Evelyn was stunned for a moment before moving into action. She had built up her full power wind attack and let it loose against the largest eagle who had been giving her trouble with its lightning attacks. With its attention diverted, this eagle failed to notice her blast of wind in time, and its body was hit hard and blown back as if it had just been impacted by a car. To make matters worse for it, there was a tall and thick tree behind it, and it impacted hard against it. Crack! As it smashed against the tree there was a loud noise and Evelyn was certain it was the sound of bone cracking. Now that she had dealt with one more of the eagles, she turned her gaze towards the direction of the attack that probably saved her life and was surprised to see where it had come from. Flying around 100 feet away was another owl that had nearly pure white feathers except for a few black ones that created a pattern down its wings and torso. Seeing it, she was immediately reminded of the snowy owl from back on Earth, though like most beasts on this world, it had grown far larger than its Earth counterpart, being around 8 feet tall. Of course, just because it helped her out here did not mean she was going to trust it. So, while this new owl and the one remaining eagle were currently having a stare down, she got back up and began flying away. She was perfectly fine to let the two of them duke it out while she escaped and found somewhere safer to rest. Though both the eagle and snowy owl were surprised to see her just get up and run away, as the eagle thought it was about to be double-teamed, while the owl thought she would be grateful for its help and stick around. However, instead of fighting each other like she had hoped, the eagle flew away not wanting to be killed, and the owl chased after her. Damn it! Just leave me alone, she thought. Unfortunately, that did not seem to be happening, so instead she circled around much to the snowy owl's surprise as she flew right past it. If I am going to have to deal with this other owl, I might as well get something else first. Soon she made it back to where the eagles had cornered her and found the one she hit trying to limp away, as it could not fly with one of its wings injured. Swooping down silently, Evelyn caught it off guard and sunk her talons into its neck. As soon as this happened, it began violently thrashing around and starting crackling with electricity. Immediately she began convulsing from the shocks running through her, and she felt an incredible pain all over her body. Yet she had endured worse pain before and continued to take it as she dug her talons into one of the beasts that had just tried to kill her. Eventually the eagle's resistance began to wane as blood poured out of its neck, and its body went limp as Evelyn took its life. Jumping off of it, she felt quite dizzy from the electrical shocks, but she stayed up and turned towards the other owl, which seemed to be waiting for her and was staring intently. Standing in front of the now dead eagle, she looked at it almost glaring, sending it the message that this was her prey. Though the other owl seemed to have no interest in the eagle's body and was instead completely focused on Evelyn. It slowly landed on the ground not far from her and began glowing faintly. Thinking that it was going to attack, Evelyn moved into a defensive posture, ready to flee if she had to. Just like the eagles that had attacked her, this owl was at the peak of the fiend beast rank, and she doubted she could win a fight in her current exhausted and injured state. Luckily it did not send out any sort of attack, and instead a thin strand of magical energy flew off its body and connected to her. As this happened, she heard a voice in her head that said, "Please to not be afraid. I was only hoping to help you." Hearing this, Evelyn was utterly shocked, since this other owl had just spoken inside her head. This was something totally new to her, and while it was not actually words that were transmitted, she received the meaning of what the other owl was trying to convey straight into her mind. "Are you doing okay? You look to be a bit injured. Did you need any of my assistance?" the other owl asked Evelyn. Testing out the connection that had been made to her, she tried transmitting her own thoughts to the other owl and it seemed to get through. "No, I am fine. Thank you for your help, but I no longer need your assistance. I would prefer if you left now." Naturally she did not trust this new owl. Just because it helped her out did not mean it was not planning something nefarious. With the experience she had from both of her lives, she had become very untrusting. Believing that any and everyone wanted to do something awful to her, or at least use her in some way. It also did not help that everyone that she ever trusted was now dead, and all that remained for her were painful memories. Nevertheless, this snowy owl did not immediately take off and leave. Though it did seem saddened by Evelyn's distrust and hostility towards it. "Are you sure you want me to go? I think it would be better if we stuck together in case any more eagles attack. They are notorious for trying to target us owls when we gather. I assume that you are also heading for the owl's roost, so it would be best to go together." Chapter 40 Evelyn's Decision. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. A puzzled look on her face, Evelyn had no clue what this snowy owl was talking about. She had not come here in search of anything in particular and had just ended up here after flying forward in one single direction. Also, she was not sure what this owl's roost was, which it seemed to be heading to. Still, she could not rule out the possibility that it was just making up some elaborate lie about a huge gathering of owls in order to get her to follow it. In her mind, this owl wanted to do something horrible to her, as pretty much the majority of her experiences had been. However, this was actually far from the truth of the matter. This owl had approached her because it had been infatuated by her. It had seen how she fought against those eagles, standing up to them even though she was quite a bit weaker and outnumbered. Also, it had watched her command both fire and wind, which was quite rare. As to him, this made it seem that she had two affinities. Though while it looked this way, she truthfully only had one affinity right now, and just had divine items that granted her other powers. Of course, this owl was not only interested in her power, but also liked the way she looked. She seemed to be the ideal mate to this snowy owl, who Evelyn would not even consider. She had no thoughts on this matter and would not even think their species were compatible if she did. But in this world, things were quite a bit different than her original one. Any member of the same race was compatible, whether they may seem to be the same species or not. as it was actually quite rare to find the exact same species once beasts had evolved to even the fiend beast rank. Sorry, I do not know about this owl's roost as you call it. I just ended up here by coincidence. Now if you will excuse me, I will be on my way. After saying this, Evelyn jumped back and began tearing through the eagle, while keeping a close eye on this snowy owl. She did not want to stick around for much longer, but she did want this eagle's beast core. Once she had retrieved it, she prepared to go, but before she did, the other owl said, "Very well, I will impede you no more. However, if you do have an interest in joining the other owls in a place where you can grow in a safer environment, head deeper into the jungle in this direction." The snowy owl then held up one of its wings and pointed her in the direction the supposed gathering of owls was supposed to be. He then flapped his wings a few times and left Evelyn alone as she wanted, while going on his way. With the eagles now dead or having fled, and the snowy owl interloper gone, Evelyn was finally able to relax her guard a bit. She was utterly exhausted after the chase and fight with those eagles and had used up most of her magical energy and physical stamina. This should help a bit, she thought as she plopped the eagle's beast core into her mouth. At first she actually had quite a bit of trouble trying to eat it, as it would not break apart and was slightly too big for her to swallow. This was due to the fact that this core came from a higher-ranked beast. Nevertheless, Evelyn's powers were abnormal to say the least, and she had strengths that other beasts at her rank would normally not have. And eventually, she was able to break down the eagle's beast core and begin absorbing its power. Immediately she felt a surge of magical energy through her, as this was the first time she had ever eaten a beast core of something higher rank than her. Now I need to find a place to rest. Flying back up into the canopy of the trees, she began searching for a place to rest. Quickly she found a large hollow in one of the trees and poked her head inside. Finding that it was empty, she nestled herself in the back of this large hollow and began lulling off to sleep. Luckily nothing disturbed her rest, and when she awoke, she felt much better than she had been before. Her magical energy and stamina had retuned, and she felt a bit stronger after having taken the power of that eagle's core. Though it was still far from enough to bring her up to the upper tier of the fiend beast rank. Now that she was well rested and free from any sort of danger, Evelyn finally had some time to think about her situation. Yesterday she had been told something nearly unbelievable. That there was a place called the Owl's Roost where many owls gathered like how humans do. Certainly, this had tickled her curiosity, as the more she thought about it, the more she believed it might be a real possibility. She did not fully trust that other owl, wondering what its motives were, but one possibility was that it might have gotten some sort of perk if it brought her with it. Frankly, she just did not know, but the thought of having a total safe place to live and grow was appealing. Still, she figured there must be some catch. Whenever anything gathered, it was always for some goal that all those who made up the group had to participate in. It might at the very least be worth taking a look into. In this world even beasts can gain intelligence, so coming together to protect each other is a very real possibility. I can head in that direction and keep my eyes out for more owls coming through to see if it was telling the truth. If it turns out there really is a sanctuary for others of my race, then I may just try and join.